Hi, welcome. I'm Chris Handley, and this is Dark Days Radio. And it seems like I'm recording this in response to Pulsegate Gaming. So they've recently put out a video about why Warmachine is a great game to get into, and why essentially he's kind of abandoned playing, to an extent, Warhammer war games. And so it felt appropriate maybe to kind of do again. I seem to do this every so often, but I think again in context for Warmachine players, why I'm drawn to and in some respects tied to now Warmachine as a game, as a setting, to the Iron Kingdoms, and so forth. So let's kind of get into it, kind of give my background with it, and then we'll get into like why I got drawn into, why I think it's a great game system, and it's a great game to get in now more than ever, but also why it was great to get into back in those early days. So Warmachine, if you are unaware of, comes from this book, Warmachine Prime. And this came out in 2003, and at the time I was studying my undergrad at the University of Manchester. And I was also working part-time. I was working as a key timer, so that meant 0 hours contract before they were so prevalent in the UK. I was working there, and I was working part-time at Games Workshop store, the one in Altrincham. So obviously I've been into wargaming since 1994 when my friend introduced me to Warhammer 40,000. So, going to university meant a bigger world, socially and worldly. And at around about that time, 2003, a new independent shop, role-play game shop, wargaming shop, board game shop opened in Manchester called Fanboy 3. It's still open. It's on different premises now, run by a guy called Dave. I've run demos there before. Please go check it out. Anyway, so on the shelves were these little boxes, and we've seen these in some unboxings I've done of classic Warmachine unboxings. These small boxes of 3 or 4 minis, depending, for Warmachine. And I was like, what's this? And so were my friends asking, what's this? My friends also being Games Workshop employees as well at the time. And we had a bit of a closer look, looked at the rule book as well. And what you got was this box of these minis, similar in scale to 40k at the time. But it was a game that we discovered that out of the box you could play immediately. So it came with cards. That was novel at the time, 2003. Remember, it also came with a flyer with literally all the rules on there that you needed to get started playing, which again was quite groundbreaking, that the rules could be expressed on what was effectively the back of an A3 poster. Crazy, but that's what we had. And so I got a box, and so did my friends at the time, and I picked up the Signar starter set. So you had Striker, you had a Charger Light Warjack, you had a Lancer Light Warjack, and you had the Ironclad Light Warjack. And the rules for Mark 1, I can tell you, right, if you've played Mark 4, or you're interested in Mark 4, you've had a little bit of a look, you looked at some back reps, Prime is effectively still the same rules. So Warmachine has not changed that much. It's interesting to go back and look at it, because you see there's a lot more finicky little things that you could do, like Warjacks could do headlocks and so forth. But anyway, we're getting into it, and we realise that, hold on a minute, we can play really fun games with just 3 or 4 models aside. We had these really cool characters that could ping off these huge effects called feats, and that was quite exciting. The fact the gameplay was around both taking objectives, but also you could do these assassination runs on your enemy warcaster and win the game that way. And you felt clever by lining up these synchronized actions of, you do this effect, you do this attack, you then do this power, and all the status effects line up to allow you to then pull off something pretty fantastic. The turn sequence as well. While it's not like we kind of like some of the systems now are where you get alternating activation, so players feel more active in the game. Warmachine, and still is this one where it's your turn, but you can pick which order the units activate, and they move, and then they do their shooting and or combat action, which means you can, when you activate your next unit, you can respond and alter your plan based upon how that went, and therefore that also features into how you're trying to line up these synergies, because if something goes wrong along the way, your best laid plan, you have to reconsider what you're doing and kind of maybe go, oh, I can't push so hard on this, I need to be more conservative on what I'm doing. It was also a really aggressive game. I mean, it has the notorious page 5, less of that spoken the better. But I think at the time, when I reflect on it, it was more of a call to arms about how Warhammer Fantasy at the time was this very slow, ponderous game with an ungodly amount of miniatures, plastic miniatures. And that was the point. You were painting rank of miniatures that end up not doing much on the board other than being a model to remove to represent a model being removed. Whereas Warmachine, it felt like everything counted, and you could be aggressive with everything, and it had a reason to be there. And that's still the same. That's still true. What we've seen in the history of Warmachine as it's gone on from edition to edition is we've got smaller units. There was a point where we had like really large units of troops, and the game seemed to focus more on that, and it's being pulled back. We're now back to warjacks and war beasts. But yeah, it was this dynamic, aggressive, tactical game which had really different design styles, different design aesthetics to all the skulls of Warhammer, and still has that, and still has not too many rivets, not too much chainmail, not too many chains, not too much fine detail laid upon it, which gives you a lot of room to like play with textures, effects on the armor panel and on the flesh that you're painting. And so, yeah, I got into it there. I picked up more models, and obviously being a lowly student, and I was only getting my discount with Games Workshop, it was, I wasn't collecting it in too deep with it. Then I finished my degree, did my PhD, had a break from Warmachine and wargaming in general. And then it was when I was living in Germany, I discovered the RPG. Now, it was in its second edition, and here's the fun thing. What came first, the wargame or the RPG? Well, it was Iron Kingdoms that came out in 2001 with the Witchfire trilogy, which is still considered a gold standard of D&D campaigns. And it introduced the Iron Kingdoms, Khador, Signar, all of those settings, Crix, the introduction of Lexia Cianor, who is a mainstay character of the setting. And I got into it, though, with the second edition, which is based upon the wargaming rules. And because of that, I got back into the miniatures. I collected a decent-sized Signar army of gun mages. Had a good Khador army. I then also started collecting a Gatorman army that I got up to, and a Scorn army. And then by the time I moved back from Germany, and then third edition came along, those armies kind of built up to size. And then when it felt that Warmachine was on a lull, and again we were buying a house and stuff, I sold off all my armies again. But I had them for a while, and so my painting has improved dramatically since then anyway. And now I'm back with it. So it was like, 2003, Warmachine comes back and at Gen Con. And the settings moved on. And the other reason I wanted to get back into it is, of course, I write for the RPG. I got pulled into the writing team for it for the books after the original Kickstarter. So Borderlands Beyond, Deep Wild, Strange Light Workshop, which is coming out on general sale soon. And so I'm really into the setting as well. I really like how we've got this Victorian, Napoleonics, World War One aesthetic. It's not really truly steampunk. We're now getting elements of Tesla punk and diesel punk in there. Um, we've got this really interesting aspect about how magic works and how that powers how magic is not this. You know how in D&D, maybe you're not aware, but D&D you get lots of like trivial magic that's done in the setting, like, oh, I'm gonna light a candle. You're not going to do those simple things. Magic in Warmachine in the Iron Kingdoms is not a trivial thing to do. Like, if you're going to wield arcane energy, it's going to do something big. And that's why you then have the Mechanica in the setting, the Arcantrix, the arcane technology to siphon and control that magic to do what we would consider in our world more mundane things, like lighting and like heating and things we consider as just like simple technology effects. So you've got this great setting, and I've been talking about the setting. I've talked about the miniatures. Like, we've seen also an evolution of the miniatures design from the kind of classic lead spun, white metal spun way of making minis that we would be used to from other manufacturers before, and now we're getting into this 3D design, 3D printed, and also hard plastics, 3D resins, which are designs which are feeling even more dynamic for Warmachine. And we're retaining some of the classic silhouettes we understand of the factions. We get new factions that have their own kind of design aesthetics. And it's just grabbed me again. And it grabbed me hard when the new one came out, and especially since they've brought out an easy way to collect, because that's the thing that's not changed. You can get started with Warmachine with a small 30-point army, with the command cadres, command set, starter sets, or a battle group box. And you can learn the game with that. And the great thing is, everything you learn at that scale of game is the same every scale of the game. It's not like you're going, oh, well, Kane in a 30-point starter game, it's not the same as Kane in a 100-points game. It's like, no, wait up. You don't need to relearn anything. These games are the same at all scales. The game scales. The only difference is you might have a few more things on the board, a few more warjacks control, but mechanically the game is the same. Mechanically the models are the same. And the rules are free. Yeah, we're not getting the cool little A3 flyer. I wish we did, maybe, in the box. I mean, printing is expensive these days. But the rules are free on a very good app. And so when you consider the cost of the models as well, I mean, this is something you have to factor into it, is you're buying the starter set for your faction. And you're getting the rules for free. You're getting the app for free. So there's a little bit of a tax in there that supports that. And I'm okay with that. Because as over at Polscape they said, you can dabble. Like, I have a lot of Warmachine armies now at this point. I've got a full Storm Legion army for Signar. I've got almost a full Gravedigger army for Signar. Full Kador army, Winter Corps. I've got Start of the Old Umbre. I've got the Shadow and Scum starter. I've got Trollkin and Chimera. I've got my old Scorn army. Whole story on that, how I got back my army that I sold. That was lucky. And I've got my Crix. And I'm mostly going to collect Old Orgoth, the Graveborn. I call them Old Orgoth. And I'll keep the elves because I'll mostly get the elves because, elves, fun, nice minis. And it's because you can dabble. Like, each of those are different size armies, and like I can enjoy them as they are. Like, I'm not going to get heavily into the Trollkin right now, but I can go like, oh, your friends wanting to play a game or wanting to learn. You don't have much time. Let's play a 30-point game. Just crack it out. Your friend doesn't collect yet, but it enjoys the game. Just crack out a little 30-point game. Just play it there and then. I mean, you could also say 30 points also supports. I mean, we've not seen this yet, and I think Steamforce should get on this. smaller battle mat size. Like, I don't think you need a 4 foot by 4 foot board to play a 30-point game of Warmachine. I think you could scale it down. I think you could have a 3 by 3, or heck, just saying, maybe you look at kind of the size of boards that a certain someone does for their smaller games, and you just play along the length. Like, that could be a valid play experience. How easy it is to collect, because you can then, well, not fully, because I mean, I said you could have a 30-point army, and then when you build up your army, you can build up to 50 points. That's really just having two or so more warjacks, and then furthermore, a few more units, a solo or so. It allows you to scale up gradually, and each level of play feels valid, because the choices you make in build your army are very different each scale, because you can't fit everything in. And I think that makes it an interesting play experience. Whereas, say, other games, particular, the big ones that we know, they feel like you have to take particular lists, and they have to be for this particular size of game, and the game is won or lost on that list. While Warmachine feels like you can play, you can dabble with how you build your army, and it's not a done deal until you're in the game. Let's also talk about, before we get into mechanics of the game, let's just talk about where we are with like terrain. Now, Warmachine has, and I really do, in some respects, if you can get hold of the old books, because there's some really great terrain inspiration, and I think we're at this kind of golden era with 3D printing of what terrain is available, because Warmachine is a setting which, while it's fantastical and has this kind of steampunkish aesthetic, a lot of the setting is not encrusted with skulls, is not ridiculously high fantasy that we get from other particular games. So you can look at like terrain makers, third parties that make lots of nice Victorian, Napoleonic terrain. You could look at, say, you can choose areas of the world and go like, well, out in the desert there'll be more terrain like that. Like the building style would be more like we see in like Morocco and so forth. We could maybe take inspiration from that. Or you could go with, like, if you wanted to depict Corvus, it's cobbled streets and these tall Victorian buildings, and maybe also some Baroque style buildings. And if you do want to have crazy skulls and stuff on it, you can do that, because that was how the Orgoth of old designed things, and those ruins still exist in the setting, so you can get some of that feel. So there's a lot you can pick and choose, and you can go for like these big steel girded kind of like almost Wild West style bridges, railways, all of that. So it's quite a genre mashup you can have. And it's been a rocky road with terrain for Warmachine, let's be honest, but we're back to a good point, because Warmachine, because it's can be so competitive. And there's a reason it supports that, and I can see that. I'm not really a competitive player, but the precision that was required, because you couldn't do pre-measuring back in the day, meant that players ended up veering to 2D terrain, template terrain, so they could precisely measure things. You don't have minis being wobbly on things. With the advent in MK4 of pre-measuring, you can just say that model is there. It's sat there. We know it is out of charge range and out of range of those weapons currently. We know precisely how far away it is. So you can play to intent. And that's great, because that means we can have nice terrain again. And we don't have these boring ass boards, which we're at a bit of a watershed moment with the fact that you look at certain other game. It's what I call its terrain boards look like they've been decorated with cereal boxes, L shapes, prescribed table layouts, and clear acrylic. Like, so there's no gotchas there. It's just the death of the vibe of the hobby, because it all seems very, like, chasing that precision seems a nonsense when the game is ultimately down to, there is a luck element of the game anyway. And you should really give some leniency to your opponent, and they should to you, about where things are placed, and be like, oh yeah, cool, just get on, enjoy the game. Now, this is why the precision of the rules, the way it's written, how there is no doubt in the rules, very little compared to other games, is why it makes it a good tournament game. But actually, I think this is why it makes it a great casual game, because the rules really fall away. When I say fall away, unintrusive to gameplay. And by that I mean you're not having to look up over 3 different books to find the ruling and the errata and so forth. Again, because it's free rules, the app allows you to drill down into rules from the card of the model. It's more rapid, it's more intuitive, it's more at your fingertips, quite literally. And that makes it great for narrative play, because then, you can relax. You can be like, okay, yeah, that's the rule, let's get on. That rule also, and I think we're seeing this again, I think Warmachine is quite good at doing this, I think the rules fit the narrative. We don't get something called ludonarrative dissonance, we've actually got a harmony going on between the rules and the narrative in most places. And that's great, because it leads to those epic moments where Kane, runs for, is able to move forward and fire off a volley of shots, having popped his feet and punctured the armor on this terrible warjack, or destroy the opponent warcaster, or say Vilkul laying down all of her ash clouds, and your troops able to move through enemy troops and terrain without penalty, and as a result attack the enemies who are weakened by these ash clouds. It all feels really, really cool and exciting. And then let's talk about the rules. So I am of the opinion, and I've said this a few times on different podcasts where I've been interviewed and so forth. Caveat, I don't write for Warmachine. I'd like to write the rules for Warmachine. That'd be kind of cool. I think the cool thing about Warmachine is every dice roll feels like it matters. So you roll 2d6 to roll to hit, 2d6 to roll to damage. No other dice rolls. And so it makes for bell curves. I always say bell curves are good. They're easy to eyeball. You get a feel for where your odds lie. You generally know where things will sit, but also you've got that feeling of like you can spike it and get some higher expectations. You can add dice to these dice pool by spending your resources, your focus or your fury or whatever, to add extra dice to the dice pool to shift that window of results. You could do spells and buffs to move along where that peak is in your bell curve. And so, and that's the same for shooting, same for arcane attacks, same for close combat. And that's where the synergies come in. You can see where a buff or a debuff shifts that. Whereas certain other games, all you're doing is re-rolling certain dice in your giant bucket of dice. And so as you go down the sequence of rolls to hit, rolls to damage, rolls to save, rolls to... Still, those extra dice rolls, those re-rolls and stuff, in the wash, it kind of just makes you feel like I could have just counted how many attacks I had and removed 1 or 2 models from the opponent's side. You could have looked up on a table. The odds of you spiking all 6s on that is very low. You'd have to do all sixes and then all sixes again, and then all sixes again, well, or whatever, all ones on the save, for you to do some massive wipeout. It all feels homogenized in the way that works, whereas Warmachine, you don't get that. Sometimes the game can really come down to that singular dice roll. And I've seen this happen. I was at PeachCon running demos.
I mentioned earlier, I had a load of people running like demo games, participation games. People just reached out and they're like, Peachy, I want to bring my game down and talk about it and play games. I was like, do it, have some fun. And they did. And I had to say no to a few people because at this point I was starting to get super worried that I definitely didn't have the space. I was like, bring stuff, and if there's room, bring it out. But I can't guarantee you a spot because I've already guaranteed it to a bunch of people. So we had Chris Hanley doing some Warmachine, among other stuff.
I saw a number of times in those demos where it literally came down to this dice roll. And missing out when you roll those 2, or however many d6 to attack, and missing out by 1 point, meaning your opponent's Warcaster is still there with 1 point of health. And that means they can fight back. That means they can blast your way. It's exciting. And it's those moments where it feels like the game can come down to that final struggle to hold an objective. That final struggle between 2 commanders battling it out. Or that or your warjacks, grinding against each other. Or war beasts tearing each other limb from limb. It really works, and it works well. And that experience is the same no matter what size game you play in the Warmachine gamut. So that's why I'm with Warmachine. There's some other things in there. I love like how the spells work. I love how magnetized the warjacks and warbeasts are, so you can tailor your army. I love having the ability to pick spells for warcasters and warlocks. So even though you've got named leaders for your army, you've got some customization there. I like that you can pre-measure. I like how unit movement works. It's a lot faster. I like how we've got rid of free strikes and facings. From the previous edition, it's smooth. It's made that smoother. And the other thing I have to say is I like how objective play works in the game, because also supported in this game, there is a lot of movement tricks and shenanigans you can do. So like other certain games, there is objective play where you're trying to take and hold an objective. But normally, to shift the opponent off an objective, you got to wipe them out. You got to grind them away. Warmachine, you can do some clever things. Warmachine, you can drag, pull, or push opponents, opposing models. You move them round. You can knock them down to make them easy to hit. So the game feels dynamic in that way. Like warjacks and warbeasts are allowed to do throws. They're allowed to do slams. That's where they run into another model, and then if it's hit, it gets pushed away like you're doing pinball. Warmachine is this game about not just slamming army lines into each other or having a gun line face another thing. It's about looking at the board and opening up paths of attack. A path to get your shooting done. A path to charge down. Working out, is there space for you to maybe teleport into that position to do your attacks. And so it feels dynamic. And that's great. And all of these rules, all of these things fit into the play styles of each army. So Signar is very much combined arms army. It likes to buff their shooting, extend their range. It likes to buff their defensives so they're less easy to hit with shooting or have better armor. Khador loves making their warjacks briefly faster than they normally are because they're quite slow and heavy armored. So they speed up and they hit like freight trains. They have lots of ice attacks, whereas Signar has a lot of lightning attacks. Signar Storm Legion is quite close combat based. Their Gravedigger army, much more shooting based, very dynamic with airdropping warjacks into play. Kador has a good shooting line of basic troops in the Winter Corps. As I say, lots of heavy armor and ice attacks and blast attacks even with their bombard cannons and mortars. You've got Crix, very fast, tricksy, can kind of like stealth easily, can be incorporeal, which is a problem. Take souls, so they've got another resource game going on where they take souls of living models that die in the game and use those to power themselves up. Can resurrect models and heal their jacks quite quickly. You've got Trollkin, just tough across the board, like they don't die very easily. And again, a bit of combined arms, close combat army, a bit like Signar, but obviously it's War Beast. You've got Dusk Elves, again, fast arcane attacks, and how they've got maybe more of a close combat leaning and some resurrection undead elements to it. Orgoth, very much faster, moving, pulling you towards them, lots of fire attacks. Chimera, very tricksy flying and glass hammer, looking to get out lots of crits. So there's a lot of choices. There's lots of stuff baked into the armies to make them feel like how they should feel. So should you get into it? I think, is now the right time to get into it? And the answer to that is, yeah, actually. We've got starter sets, like starter forces, for Signar, which works for both Signar armies. Kador works for both Kador armies. They're in hard plastic, available individually, but if you're lucky to find the two player set, then find it, buy it, because it's worth it. We've got the same for the Chimera and Southern Creoles Brine Bloods. So again, they're now available separately, but if you can find the set where they're combined, great value. We've got the new one coming out, which is Dusk Elves and Orgoth Graveborn. So they're going to be plastic together. And then we've got Old Orgoth. Old Umbre. That's resin. We've got the same for... there's a similar one for Crix. There's a similar one for Gravediggers. There's sort of similar ones for Signar. There is a similar one, actually, tell I, for Signar Storm Legion, and also for Orgoth. There's the 3D print one you can do from My Mini Factory for free. The SLs are free, which gives you the Cephalax, which is another starter force for Crix. And likely will be, you never know, we might get a full Cephalax army again for MK4, which that'll be a starter army for. So there's all these relatively cheap, we're looking at like 60, 70, 80 pound intros to the game, but at least they're fully playable and scalable, and what you learn to play with them is everything you need. The rules are free, so it's not like you have to go out and buy a rule book and then buy a codex or whatever. It's all there. It's all free. Just pick the models you like, the style of play you like, and get into it. The setting's full of nuances. There's no true good guy or bad guy. I guess you could say with the Infernals and the Orgoth, but there's a lot of nuance with it. There's a lot of cool characters out there. The plot line moves along. When Warmachine came out originally, and Nine Kingdoms, that was set in what we call 605 after 605 after Rebellion AR. We're now into the 620, 630, I think, in the timeline. So that is, and characters have died. I talk about Striker from MK1 Warmachine. He's dead. Plenty of others are dead. But we've got new characters. We've got characters who are children of previous characters. Things like that. It's it's a living setting in that sense. Yeah, I think that covers it. I think that covers why I like it. I think within that there's the why of where new players are getting into it and why they're latching onto it. I think there's why they're escaping, leaving, abandoning, looking for alternatives from other certain war games because the rules churn, the amount of models you need. When a new edition comes out, it completely invalidates your army. Like, editions of Warmachine happened on a, almost at this point we're saying like a 7-year cycle. That's good. That allows a game to breathe, to address its faults, for people to not get overwhelmed with errata month on month for game balance. It allows you to buy a book. I mean, we don't have printed books yet, but we're going to print a rule book. But buy stuff and not feel like you've wasted money on it, because in a few months it's going to be errata to hell and back. You know, Warmachine's in a good place, and if you're looking to get into it, you should do so. So, I've got some quick videos on the shorts, which are basically how to play Warmachine. I've been doing a series about quick introductions to each faction. We're going to do some more videos, maybe into each faction more purely in a setting kind of way, rather than about how they play, so you can learn about who they are. There are already longer format podcast episodes about the factions of Warmachine that I've done. I need to do more, so bear with me, which are more from the roleplay game aspect, but they do get into the setting in a deeper aspect. And yeah, if you've got other thoughts and things you want to see, by all means, ask me questions. Get to me on social media. Have a look at the 360s I've done of models in the shorts, and ask me about how I painted things. Do you want to see me paint more things? Lots of questions, lots of ideas, waiting to hear back from you. But by all means, now is a great time to get into Warmachine.